The whole Unfezant line has to be the most forgettable early route bird in all of Pokemon. We have Pidgey, which is iconic as it was the very first early route bird, Talonflame, which dominated the competitive scene in Generation 6, and Staraptor, which has been a great Pokemon ever since it was first introduced in Generation 4. Sadly, Unfezant doesn't exactly share the same fate as its other bird counterparts. In the most recent community poll, Unfezant beat out Persian to be featured in the next episode of the worst Pokemon series, so in this video, we'll be discussing if Unfezant is the worst Pokemon or not. If you guys want to vote in the next community poll for the worst Pokemon series, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the poll in your sub feed, and click that like button as it really does help the channel grow. Let's see if we can reach 30 likes on this video. If you guys want to recommend a specific Pokemon to be featured in the next worst Pokemon poll, leave a comment down below, but before you do so, please check out the full playlist of all of the Pokemon that have been featured so far in the description. The majority of comments I get of recommendations are Pokemon I've already featured, so please check the playlist to see which Pokemon have been featured already. Before we get too far into this, it's also very important to understand that this series focuses on competitive battling, which is very different than battling against NPCs or battling against gym leaders in the game. If you're new to competitive Pokemon, I highly recommend you check out the description so you can have a better understanding of how competitive Pokemon works. We will rate Unfezant on a scale 1 through 5 based on its offense, defense, versatility, Movepool, and overall viability. If Unfezant doesn't excel in any of these categories, then it might just be the worst Pokemon out there. Keep an eye on your sub feed for the next poll, and now let's talk more about Unfezant. So taking a closer look at Unfezant, it is a normal and flying type Pokemon introduced in Generation 5 with the abilities Big Pex, Rivalry, and Super Luck. None of these abilities are particularly that great, although I would say the best of 3 would be Super Luck, as it raises Unfezant's critical hit ratio by 1 stage. Unfezant has a stat line of 80 HP, 115 attack, 80 defense, 65 special attack, 55 special defense, and 93 speed. Overall, these stats actually look pretty decent. Unfezant even got a pretty significant stat buff in Generation 6, gaining 10 extra points in attack, boosting up to 115. Now moving on to Unfezant's positives. For the first positive, you have a pretty good attack stat. 115 is definitely nothing to slouch at. It's not particularly that high, but it is high enough to do some serious damage, especially with a damage boosting item behind it, or with the Super Luck ability increasing your critical hit ratio, giving you more critical hits. For the next positive, Unfezant has 2 immunities. Arguably one of the best things about the normal and flying type pairing is that they have an immunity to ground and ghost. It's not very common for Pokemon to have more than 1 immunity, if any, so this is a pretty big plus. Unfezant also has some pretty nice support options. Unfezant has access to moves like Tailwind, Hypnosis, and Taunt, just to name a few, which are all great support moves. Unfezant has a respectable speed stat of 93 as well, making it faster than most bulky Pokemon to make Taunt even more effective. Unfezant has access to U-Turn as well. U-Turn is one of the best moves in the game in my opinion, as it gives you some initiative and can really change the momentum of the battle for your favor. The Super Luck ability can also be a pretty nice positive. Now, although it isn't the best ability since it is RNG based, the increased chance of a critical hit can really make the difference and help Unfezant's overall damage output. It's also really the only ability you can ever use on this thing since the other 2 abilities aren't too useful. And now on to the negatives. You have some pretty poor physically offensive coverage. Unfezant has very limited coverage, as Steel Wing and Night Slash are pretty much its only real non-stab options. Now, although Unfezant only has a special attack set of 65, which is pretty low, it is interesting to note that it does have access to move Heat Wave. Not exactly sure why this is, as another physical coverage move would have helped it a lot more than having Heat Wave, since you'll probably never use Heat Wave on this Pokemon anyway. Unfezant also really struggles against Pokemon that resist its stabs. Now this seems like it would be an issue for just about every single Pokemon in existence, but when you look at a Pokemon like Unfezant who is a normal and flying type and has very limited physical coverage, it's a pretty major problem. Other Pokemon typically have some sort of coverage option to hit Pokemon that resist both their stabs, and since Unfezant is a normal and flying type, it will really struggle against Rock, Ghost, and Steel types as they resist one or both of Unfezant's stab moves. This makes Unfezant quite the liability since Rock types are free to do whatever they want against an opposing Unfezant. Low special bulk. Unfezant's HP and defense stat are pretty average at 80 each, it's really not that bad, but its special defense stat of 55 really sets it back. It is weak to Ice and Electric, which are both most commonly specially offensive moves, meaning Unfezant will struggle a lot against special attackers. And now moving on to the ratings. In terms of offense, I'll give Unfezant a 3.5 out of 5. Unfezant has a good attack set of 115, and the ability Super Luck does technically help it out offensively, although this is an RNG based ability. Unfezant is definitely one of the best offensive Pokemon featured in the series so far, which is why it has a pretty respectable rating of 3.5. For defense, I'll give Unfezant a 2 out of 5. Unfezant's defenses aren't really that bad, but they aren't great. 80 in HP in defense isn't particularly high, but it is good enough. Now, Unfezant isn't a defensive Pokemon by any means, it's just a mediocre in the defensive category, although it's not completely useless when it comes to defense. It can take a couple of hits, but not that many. For versatility, I'll give Unfezant a 1 out of 5. There really isn't much Unfezant can do, sadly, as the only ability it can really take advantage of is Super Luck, and its move pool is rather limited, meaning there aren't very many different sets you could run with this Pokemon. For move pool, I'll give Unfezant a 1.5 out of 5. Unfezant has a rather strange move pool, as it has some nice support options for a Pokemon whose stats make it a more offensive Pokemon, such as Tailwind, Taunt, and Defog. These are all great for utility, but sadly offensively its move pool is really lacking. The physical coverage is nearly non-existent, and the overall move pool in general is relatively shallow. The weirdest thing about Unfezant is I really do feel like its stats don't match its move pool at all. And for viability, I'll give Unfezant a 1 out of 5. Sadly, there just isn't much of a reason to ever use Unfezant. Sure, it has a pretty nice attack stat, decent speed, and access to U-turn, but there are plenty of other flying type Pokemon options that are just better than Unfezant. If you compare it to a Pokemon like Dodrio, Dodrio has only 5 less attack points, but its speed is much higher at 110 speed. This makes Dodrio a much better flying type offensive Pokemon than Unfezant, especially since Dodrio has access to stronger stat flying moves such as Brave Bird. Unfezant does have a nice few niches like Super Luck and the support moves, however, but that really isn't enough to warrant using Unfezant over the plethora of other flying type Pokemon that are better than it. Now for some move pools, for the first set we have Smogon's Tailwind support set. We have Unfezant with the Focus Sash, Super Luck ability, max attack, max speed, Adamant Nature, Tailwind, Hypnosis, U-turn, and Return. This is definitely more of a support set. You can set up your Tailwind, go for a U-turn right away. You have that fast Hypnosis, which is rather gimmicky because it's only 60 accurate, but you're going to be faster than a lot of things that are bulkier, so you can go for Hypnosis, go for a Tailwind, go for a U-turn, and then bring something in that could potentially pull off a sweep. Next up, we have a Critical Hit Master set, more of a gimmicky set, but it is a lot more fun and arguably more effective. We have Unfezant with the Scope Lens item to increase that critical hit ratio, Super Luck ability, of course, max attack, max speed, Jolly Nature, want to be as fast as we possibly can for those critical hits, Tailwind, Night Slash, U-turn, and Return. Now, since we are relying more on getting critical hits, the Jolly Nature is better because you don't really need the extra damage being adamant because you should get more crits anyway. We also have Night Slash just because it has increased critical hit ratio, so that could be fun to get more crits. U-turn because it's U-turn, Return for stab, and Tailwind for the more speed. Tailwind could be replaced with any bird coverage move such as Aerial Ace, because unfortunately Unfezant does not have Brave Bird. Now for some improvements, a wider move pool, access to even just a couple of more physical coverage options could make a huge difference for this Pokemon. Slightly more speed as well would be really nice, even just a boost to 100. As having Super Luck on a Pokemon with more than 100 speed might be a little bit too crazy. Now for some partners here, Unfezant, something to handle rock and steel types like a ground type would be really nice. This will also cover Unfezant's electric weakness, as the ground type will be immune to electric. However, now since you have 2 ice weak Pokemon, a steel type Pokemon would fit this very, very nicely. Something like Registeel or even something like Klinklang would be pretty nice. Klinklang also has access to the move Volt Switch, so that could provide with some nice Volt Turn for your team. And that's Unfezant. Is Unfezant the worst Pokemon? Let me know what you guys think about Unfezant in the comment section down below for a chance to have your comment featured on the next worst Pokemon video, like this comment right here. Personally, I think Unfezant is close to being a decent Pokemon, but it falls just a little short in so many categories. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure you guys click that like button if you haven't already, as it really helps the channel a ton. Subscribe if you haven't already. Have a great rest of your day. I will see you all next time, and bye-bye.